Good afternoon. My name is Dan Wright, and I'm your host for episode 2 of the TechDiver Chronicles. Our next guest is Edd Sorenson, the owner of Cave Adventurers, based in Marianna, Florida. I'm losing it. I'm like 19. I've been awake for like 26 hours or something. Good afternoon, Ed. Thanks for being here. Tell me, when did you actually begin diving?
My open water checkout dive in a little lake called Battleground Lake in Battleground, Washington, right across the Washington-Oregon border. And it was 39 degrees in the water. It was October, I believe. It was only about 35 or 40 degrees outside, 39 degrees inside the water. I was frozen. And I thought to myself, why am I doing this? But obviously, I'm glad I did.
Did you start diving right away in dry suits in Oregon?
I did. So when I did my checkout dive in that 39-degree mud hole that they called a lake, it was a rented wetsuit, part of the gear package with the with the open water class, and it didn't fit that well. It was used, worn, maybe worn out. I was shivering so bad, and I remember two guys getting out of the water, and for some reason people actually dove this place on purpose. There was an old skating rink that was down. It used to go out over the lake, and it collapsed into the lake, so people would dive and look at this old roller rink down there at the bottom. Anyway, they came out and they were talking about their dive, and they were just calm and talking and warm, and I was sitting there shivering. And I asked my instructor, what are they diving? Oh, don't worry about that. That's way down the road. That's a dry suit. And I said, screw that. That's tomorrow. And the next day I went right down to my local dive shop, and I bought a whole bunch of dive gear, but I bought a dry suit, took a dry suit class. And so technically for, I think, almost till I started my cave class in the 90s, I had zero open water or zero wetsuit dives because training dives don't count. So my first actual dive as an open water diver was in a dry suit. So I've been diving dry suits a long time.
Tell us, Ed, what made you move to Florida?
So my original plan was to retire at 40 and do the things that I wanted to do while I was still young enough to do them. And of course, the internet crash, stock market crash thing in 2000, I lost about $250,000 in the stock market. So that kind of hurt my retirement plans. But it was 2002. I was in Florida for a dive trip. I would come here about 4 times a year, here being Florida. I'd never been here to the Jackson County. I'd come about 4 times a year and then once a year to Mexico. And on one of my trips, I was down at, staying at one of Bill Reneker's places in Live Oak, and everything was blown out. It's crappy weather. And the only thing diveable was Jenny and Manatee, and both of them were crappy but diveable. Everything else was blown out. And my friend Jeff and I were here for 2 weeks, and I remember we were eating dinner with Steve Gamble. He was a good friend of mine back then, doing the dry suit and scooter repair. And I asked him, I said, there's got to be someplace else to dive. And we had just dove that day at Manatee Springs, and it was crappy but diveable. And he said, there's a place called Jackson Blue, but it's a drive. And I said, how long a drive are we talking? He said, it's almost 3 hours. I said, I just flew 3,500 miles to go cave diving. I said, a 3-hour drive's nothing. So we drove up here. First dive in, I went into the most, back in the 90s, most of those caves down there were very black and dark. This was so white. I remember we scootered into the cavern at Jackson Blue, and it was just this pristine white walls with this blue water. And I thought, wow, this is awesome. And anyway, we did our first dive there. The next day we dove Jenny, And while we were eating lunch, I said, what do you want to do tomorrow? He said, let's go back to that Jackson Blue place. So we drove up here again, did our first dive, and then we went to lunch, and I was calling Steve to find out where Twin Cave was and how to get there. And I had one of those little real estate magazines. I had planned on moving to Florida to retire. So every trip, I would get those little real estate magazines that you see in the little newsstand thing. And I would look at what was available, call realtors and stuff. And I found this place, 1,800 square foot, each floor house. It was only 11 years old on the mill pond. They were asking $150,000. Well, this house would have been like 1.5 million in Portland. And I remember looking at it and I was like, what the heck's wrong with this house? I came out, looked at it, and I bought it right there on the spot. And my dive partner was like, what are you doing? You're not buying a house on vacation. And I said, yeah, I am. So I bought it. It was like an impulse buy. Like oh, I like that candy bar, and you grab it. So I remember we flew home after our 2 weeks was up. Stacy came and picked me up from the airport, and she said, how was your trip? I said, oh, it was good. I said, I bought a house. I'm moving to Florida. And she said, all right, when do we leave? So that was it. The plan was just to move here, retire. I sold my excavation company. I sold my house, my rental houses. I had motor homes and boats. I was skiing pro slalom tournaments. I was mud bog racing. I played hockey. I had my own men's league hockey team. So I started selling off everything. And the plan was to move here and dive every day. And just retire, dive every day, just for fun. And then I realized the nearest place to get gas was 60 miles east to Tallahassee, 60 miles south to Panama City, or 55 miles west to Vortex, or up into Dothan, Alabama. So I thought, wow, I can't be driving there twice a day. That's going to really cut into my diving.
So you found there was some sort of need for a dive shop at the mill pond.
I was talking to my accountant, and I had just sold all this stuff, and he said, you need tax write-offs. He said, start a dive shop. I said, I don't want a dive shop. And he said, well, just start one for the name. He said, buy all the stuff you want to buy, write it off, and then close it. I said, okay. And then the first people I met at Blue Springs Park, I had just finished a dive when they got there. And hardly anybody came here because it was so inconvenient for the dive community. And most of the people that came here were on their way from west, like Mississippi, Texas, Louisiana, whatever. And they were heading towards Jenny Springs, Live Oak, Peacock, whatever. And they would stop here with full tanks, do a dive, and leave. And so I bought all this stuff, and the first people I met, they said, oh, you done for the day? I said, no, I'm just gonna go back and fill up and come back do another dive. And they said, where are you filling up at? I said, oh, I have a shop right down the street. And people started showing up. But I had opened the shop, I started teaching again because I wanted to help people. I saw years and years ago, if people died in a cave and we had to go get them, it was usually untrained divers, but we started having more and more cave divers dying in caves. And I thought, this doesn't need to happen. And so I started teaching, and most people that know me know I have very high standards. And so we make cave divers. We don't hand out certification cards. My friend Chris Richardson owns Deep Six. He used to call it feel-good instructors. I'm not a feel-good instructor. So anyway, it just grew and grew and grew and grew, and here we are today.
Ed, can you recall when you met Mike Young?
I met Mike Young, man, I'm not even really sure. We had met before, but when I was helping, there was an instructor who, God rest his soul, he's passed away now, Slim. There was a couple of them that were diving this semi-closed rebreather that Mike had designed, and he was calling, it didn't have a name back then, but it later became the Gem. And I was helping test dive it, and then I got the very first one, or one of the first ones at DEMA that year, because I saw it was so small. The canister was small, and then it was so basic. And we were doing a lot of exploration way in the back of Jackson Blue. And I think back then, I think I had it pushed past 10,000 feet. And there was a small restriction along the way around 5,000-ish feet. And we couldn't, it was really hard to push scooters and the small silent submersion N19s had just come out, and we could barely get that through this little bottle off restriction. And so we would dive 121s, and we would dive stage bottles to there, and then we'd push this one scooter. We'd ride a different scooter to there, then we'd push the smaller scooter through the restriction. And so we didn't have any other bailout bottles, or safety bottles or stage bottles. So I thought that would really help. And I set it up many years ago when Jackson Blue was really, really flowing when we were doing that exploration. There wasn't the fast scooters like we have now, like the Seacraft Futures and Ghost. The UV26s weren't very fast, and the Gavins were the two most popular. And the flow was so strong that when you had a couple stages hanging down, you'd be scootering along and you'd look over at this rock and you'd scooter, and you'd look over and you're looking at the same rock. And you're like, I'm not going anywhere. So I came up with a way to stage back here instead of out front, because all this drag was slowing us down too much in that high flow. So your body has this natural curve here and your tank curves the other way, and it created this V. So I had the bottle sit there, and I made a separate stage bottle setup. And when the stage bottle was on, if I was coming at you and we were both horizontal, you wouldn't even see that I had stages until you were passing me. And I had people going, wow, how did you do that? Can you teach me to do that? Anyway, I was thinking this would be perfect for that. The gas extending machine is what GM stood for. So Mike made this thing, and it was supposed to be a recreational semi-closed rebreather, and I reconfigured it so it sat here as a side mount rebreather, and I dove that. I think that was around 2000, I'm not sure, 8 or 9, I think. And then in around 15, he came out called me up one day and had something else for me to try out. I'm going to send it to you for a couple months, and it was called the Sidekick. So we dove that for a long time. So that's really when Mike and I started becoming more than just acquaintances, I think.
What was the first rebreather you used? Was it a dragger?
The Atlantis one. It had just come out, I think it was 1996. My dive partner was such a technical gearhead. I mean, when I dive, I'm very into my dive. But when I'm done diving, I throw the stuff in the corner and I don't think about it until it's time to fill up and go diving. And he would take his harness apart like every day just for fun. And I tried re-rigging this and I moved these D-rings up 1/4 of an inch. And that just wasn't me. I didn't like messing with things, and he just liked to tinker with stuff all the time. And we would go to these dive shows. Oh, they got the Cislunar such and such on display. We got to go look at that. And he wanted to dive rebreathers. And we just happened to be on a live-aboard up in Canada. And we hadn't really looked at any specific rebreathers. We just looked at, a bunch of different ones. And there was a guy that was an instructor on the boat that he had a couple of extra rebreathers, and he was a rebreather instructor, and they just happened to be the Atlantis one. They had just come out. He goes, "Hey, I just signed us up for a rebreather class." I'm like, "I'm on vacation. I'm not taking a class." Yeah, you are. So anyway, that was it. That was when I first delved into rebreathers.
Was side mount your go-to configuration in cave diving?
I've originally started with looking at side mount with Bill Renneker. I think it was 1998. And there was no such thing as a class back then, a side mount class. You got to be mentored, and you had to get to know the person because it was a job-specific tool. It was considered very dangerous. And so that person had to get to know you and decide whether you had the mental wherewithal to do that kind of dangerous diving or not. And Bill and I had become friends over the years, so he was going to mentor me in side mount diving. And it just seemed like every time we went down there, he had some kind of a health issue. He had gout in his feet real bad. And so we would do lecture and stuff, and then we didn't get to dive. And then we would do this, and we didn't get to dive. And then we'd finally get to dive. And then, so it wasn't like a 2-day class like they are now. You did it until he said you were done. And so I really never finished. I was very intrigued by it, very fascinated, but it wasn't until I moved here in 2003, because there was so many side mount caves on the mill pond. And that's when I decided to get back into it. So I started doing some stuff on my own, and I really didn't have a good side mount harness. And then Lamar Hires, that owns Dive Right, he really helped me out a lot, and he was kind of my mentor. Him and Jerry Murphy helped me out a bunch. And I just got really into it. As soon as I did it, I knew that was it. And then I started tinkering with things like my buddy used to do. And I was never happy with anything. The harness went back here. It was, we were using, you had to build your own. And we were using the Transpac harness, which was basically just a soft back plate and harness. And I was really big back then. I was really into bodybuilding. And that thing would cut into my armpits. And that's what I hated about doubles. It would cut into my armpits so bad, and I lost a lot of my mobility. My chest was really big, my shoulders were big, my arms were big. And this was so uncomfortable cutting in like that. So I started moving the harness out, and I turned it into an H harness. And I found, wow, this is so much more comfortable. Why doesn't everybody do this? And then when the Nomad came out, Lamar brought it up here, and he had only made a couple of prototypes, and so I was going to test dive it. And the first thing I did was slide it out here. And then I also always hated, my arms were so big. I wasn't very flexible. I was big, but I wasn't very flexible. And so when I'm horizontal, I would hate to do this with that corrugated hose. It was so uncomfortable. So I took the corrugated hose off, and I took the pull dump off the bottom corner, and I put it up here. But I couldn't reach it either, so I made a tubing coming down with a pull ball on it down here, and I started doing that, and it was so much more comfortable. And there again, I caught so much flack over that. Oh, this is dangerous. And then people would bring their stuff to me. Hey, can you do that? Also, I was diving it for everything. Pretty much everybody else you saw that was side mount diving back then, and there wasn't that many people doing it. Kurt Bowen, Brett Hempill, those kind of guys. But usually they were in back mounted doubles when they were diving big cave. They were only in side mount when they were doing side mount cave. Lamar, he was always in a set of doubles at Jenny Springs. He was only in side mount when he was doing side mount stuff. And I thought, why can't I do this for everything? It's so much more comfortable. So I started doing it for everything. Then I started preaching it to other people that had back issues or knee issues, or I had a couple of people that were amputees, and they'd have to have somebody else carry their doubles to the water. And anyway, so then I started modifying things because I always wanted to look like this. I always wanted to be trim, and side mount diving was really back then about crawling through little stuff. So then I noticed all the wings were made wrong, because back then we were diving steel tanks, and so we would have to use a doubles wing, but the physics were all wrong. With doubles, your isolation manifold, as we all know, hits you right about the center of the back of your head, because your tanks are up here. And now with side mount, they're clear down here. So on a set of doubles, a doubles wing lifts the weight of the tanks. And the first thing we learned in flying lessons was weight equals lift, thrust equals drag to stay stationary. And I noticed the weight was in the wrong place. The lift was here, the weight was here on doubles. The lift was here, the weight was here on side mount. So you had weight back here down by your butt with no lift, and you had lift up here with no weight. And so you had divers going through the water like this, and people would put on these big clunky 5-pound, 6-pound lead weights on their shoulders, which would get tangled up and shit. So anyway, I started modifying things. I started going, okay, well, let's put some bungee around here to force the gas down here. And then all of a sudden it was all over the forums and stuff like that as the Edd mods. And then as more and more people turned to side mounting, more and more people would go, hey, can you fix my stuff? And so anyway, then manufacturers started coming to me, hey, can you help us? And Nick Hollis was a friend of mine, and he would ask me, hey, can you help us? And so I started designing wings for Hollis Manufacturing.
How did you help in the Sidewinder design?
I had been diving the Sidekick. Mike had given that to me, I don't know, quite a ways before, and loved it. Great rig, was teaching it. And then one day he called me up. We were getting ready for the NSSCDF's International Cave Conference. So he was going to be coming down from Arkansas, and he called me up and said, I got a new toy for you to play with. I said, good, what is it? I'm not going to tell you. I said, you can't do that. You can't get me excited about a new toy and then not tell me what it is. And he said, well, you'll see it when I get there. And that was going to be another week or so down the road. I said, oh, come on, give me a hint. Nope. So that was it. And then a few days before the conference, he called me up and said, I can't come to the conference. Can you run the KISS booth for me? And I said, sure. And he said, I'm going to send this new toy down for you to play with. And I said, okay, well, you're sending it now, so tell me about it. Nope, call me when you get it. And this box comes, and it's all set up on a SMS 100, I think. And I called him up. I'm looking at it. I'm like, what the heck is this? And I called him up, and I started immediately going, yeah, I think you're going to have a problem with this, and I think we're going to have a problem with that. He said, why don't you just dive it first? So I put it on. I went diving. And he had explained that he had designed it to be a sump diving rig. He wanted something small, lightweight, easy to push, into the dry caves, back to where the sumps were, and blah, blah, blah. So I started playing with it, and it had these Cordura bags, and they had 1/8-inch shock cord with, I don't know, there must have been 25 eyelets in this thing, and this would lace up like a pair of shoes. And I remember taking it apart, took a long time, and then cleaning it, and then repacking it and putting it back together. It would take so long to put this thing together. And when you got all done, there was these big long tails of extra lacing by the time you laced it all up. And I'm like, what the heck am I going to do with this stuff? And it was kind of back here. It was kind of a low profile back mount rig. And so I started looking at, how do we do this? How should I do that? And because I wanted to use it for cave exploration, and I needed to be able to scrape through the smallest of small restrictions. And so then I had to figure out some way better than these lace-up bag things that he had going on there. Called him up, and I said, here's my idea. And the Sidekick had if you've seen it, they have that stainless steel cage, and it's got a bunch of holes in it, so it's not pure stainless steel. Because I'd asked my buddy, Ben Martinez, he was my main dive partner, and he was also on a Sidekick, and him and I were doing a lot of exploration in JB too. And I said, will you help me with the R&D on this new rebreather? And he's like, what do you need? And I said, I want to have it on and dive it, and then I want you to film me from all different angles so I can look at it. And then after, say, an hour or so, we'll pop up, and then we'll switch. You put it on. He's like, no, whoa, no, I'm not doing that. I'm like, why not? I'm not putting that thing on. Because it didn't look conventional. It was typical Mike Young thinking. I think he always thinks outside the box. And so anyway, he said, I said I'd help you. I'll film you. I'm not diving it. I said, all right. So we get to the park, and for time's sake, I thought, well, let's just put a hose clamp around it and a little piece of lanyard and a couple of bolt snaps, and I'll make some loops here. And it was just, whoosh, and it was on. I was like, ooh, that's so much faster. So anyway, I get this thing all built. I get it down to the park. It's sitting on this picnic table. I'm gearing up on this table. Ben's over here, and his girlfriend Michelle was there, and we were sitting there chatting, and I'm all suited up, and I turn around to grab the rebreather, and it's gone. I'm like, where did it go? There's nobody in the park. Who could have stolen it? And then I see Ben walking to the water with it on. I'm like, what are you doing? I figured I said I'd help. Let's go. And then I couldn't get him out of it. He loved it. It just felt good. It felt like you were side mount diving, and you didn't even know you had a rebreather on. So then I started finding problems. Okay, if the towers are too far down, they hit you and it swings the can up, and then you try and go through a restriction and you'd hit the can. Or you'd have it rotated too much the other way, and then the tower's stuck up. And I still see people today who were taught poorly, and their towers are sticking up like this, and their loop hoses are right where they're going to get snagged on the ceiling. But anyway, I just threw a lot of different dives, and I actually had to put marks on it and clock it and keep changing it until I came up with the perfect configuration that sat tight, and anything that my chest would fit through, I could squeeze through. So, and I had asked Mike, I said, because Facebook was becoming more and more popular. I said, can I post some pictures of this since it doesn't exist? And he's like, yeah, you're on the R&D team. You can do whatever you want. So I started posting. And then when DEMA came, was in November, I think, of 16, and we weren't going to put it out to the public till February of 17. And I don't know, we sold like 60 of them that day, that 3-day, 4-day DEMA time frame. And I remember Mike saying, I don't know I can't thank you enough. This was supposed to be a sump rig, and I was hoping to sell 2 or 3 of these a year. And he said, we sold 60 of them during DEMA, and they're not even out to the public yet. So it just became a phenomenon that, and the thing is the more I'd post about it, the more people would bash it. Oh, that thing's a piece of crap. Doesn't have a moisture. If you get any water in, you're going to die. If you go through a restriction, you're going to die. If you do this, you're going to die. It breathes like shit. And I'm thinking, I have the only one. So when did you sneak into my shop, pack it, go dive it, so that you knew it breathed like crap? But anyway, it just sold and sold and sold. And it was funny. Mike and I would talk like almost every day. And I'd read him some of this, you know, the absolute hate mail he would get on it. And I'm like, man, does that bother you? He's like, you know, if I wasn't struggling with a 6-month backlog and building 7 days a week, 15 hours a day, and still becoming more and more behind, he said, maybe I'd worry about that. So, you know, typical Mike, he was always cool, calm, and collected, and really didn't care what you thought. If you wanted to buy it, buy it. If you don't, don't. So, anyway, that's how I started helping with the Sidewinder, and then I was the first instructor trainer, and it just grew and grew and grew and grew, and I'm still can't hardly teach enough classes.
Tell me, how many divers do you think you've trained on the Sidewinder over the years?
Man, I have no idea. At one time, I think my best month, I sold 11 of them in a month. So I was averaging probably 6 or 7, maybe 8 a month, 12 months out of the year since 2017. So I've done a lot. I mean, I actually started having to give away so many of my classes because, you know, DPV classes, cave classes, cavern classes, and teach more instructors, because to teach 4 cave adventures, you had to be taught by me because I have a specific way to teach. We have specific things that we do differently. So I had to teach instructors to teach 4 cave adventurers to do more of the side mount and the DPV and the stage classes and all of them. And for several years, I think pretty much all I did was Sidewinder classes and Sidewinder instructor classes. An occasional DPV or an occasional cave class, but mostly it was just for the first, 5 years. I think it was just like nothing but Sidewinder classes.
What are the strengths and weaknesses of the Sidewinder?
That's still prototype number 2. It's got thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of hours on it. It's been dropped, beaten, kicked, fell off the tailgate, fell off benches, run through restrictions smaller than most humans would even attempt. And I think last year I changed an O-ring. So, I mean, it's really bulletproof. The work of breathing is exceptional. I mean, the only time, knock on wood, that I've ever had to bail off the thing was in class teaching somebody else how to bail out. I've had to bail out on all the other rebreathers. I mean, I'm certified on 15 different rebreathers. But I don't think I've, good fortune has been with me, I guess. But so it's a pretty solid rig. It's pretty bulletproof.
Do you have a number on how many divers do you think you have saved over the years?
So saved rescues, 6. So up until 2012, well, when the IUCRR started, I was invited. It was invite only back then in the 90s. And Henry Nicholson started it. And when I came, I was still in Oregon. I came to Florida to do my IUCRR training. And he said, it's called the Cave Rescue and Recovery Team, but there are no cave rescues, only recoveries. By the time someone's reported overdue, 911's called, a body recovery specialist is to be called. We get our gear packed up, we drive to the site, we gear up, we go in, then we got to find them. They're long since gone. I think up until 2012, there had only been 4 cave rescues in history. And I knew all the guys that had done them, Woody and Lamar, Scott Hunsucker. And it was just such a rare event. It just was almost a non-issue. It just didn't happen. And in 2012, I did 4 in 1 year. And it was like unheard of. And then in 2013, I did another one. And I thought that would never happen again. And then in 2018, I think, I got the call that Josh had disappeared. So that he was part of the rescue team that got those kids out of Thailand. In fact, I was the first one that was called when those kids came up missing in that cave in Thailand because of my reputation. And the lady from the BBC said she had Googled cave rescue and my name came up a lot. So when she called me at like 5 in the morning, the news hadn't even hit the US, I don't think. And so I said, I don't even know what you're talking about. So she explained it, sent a bunch of stuff over on the internet for me to look at. And would you come? And I said, absolutely. So I called Mike, and we were set to go, but the IUCRR didn't have a contract with Thailand. So we had to wait for the Thai government to give us permission in writing to come. And I remember Ken Hill called me and said, Ed, you don't want to do this. And I said, yeah, I do. That's what I do. I help people. And he said, have you looked at a map? This is right on the Thailand-Burmese border, and it's all poppy fields and drug czar land. And I said, well, the pictures I saw, it was nothing but Thai military, Thai police, and there was hundreds and hundreds of them. I said, I don't think any drug dealer is going to try and mess with a guy that's coming to rescue kids with the entire Thai military there. I said, I think we'll be safe. But in the meantime, the Thai government didn't want us there. They wanted their guys to do it. So in the meantime, the British cave rescue team showed. These guys are sitting over here. One of the Thai Navy divers drowned. It was monsooning, so the flow was really ripping. And so they let the British rescue team go in, and of course the rest is history. We know they did an unbelievably great job getting them out. And anyway, the next year, 5 of that rescue team that got those kids out was here in Tennessee. We're up in Tennessee, and they were doing some cave diving up there. And they got to this one little cave that only 2 people had ever been in. And Thorne had access to it from the people that owned the private property. So he was going to let them dive it. They dove it for 2 days, and they wanted to change the line out or something. And 2 of them went in to a cave they'd been in for 2 days. And the whole cave was only like 600 feet long. And, but it was small and nasty. And one of them didn't come out. And since they're the best rescue team in the world, they didn't even call 911. They just kept looking for their friend. And they had people shuttling tanks and what have you. They ended up doing, I think, 8 dives over 11 hours looking for Josh. And apparently I found out later that Josh had found this air pocket in the back. And he had tried 3 self-rescues over that. I think by the time I got there, it was like 27 hours. But when they called me at 2:30 in the morning, they were out of tanks and out of food and out of energy. And they said, will you come and get our friend? I said, sure. So I got up, Stacy started booking flights, and I started packing my gear. And I'm thinking, it's 27 hours, he's dead. I'm doing a body recovery. And the only other person that had been there was Jason Richards. And I called him in Hawaii, and he's like, holy cow, it's like way early. Something really bad's happened. So I explained it to him, and I said, is that air pocket big enough to sustain life this long? He said, no, you're doing a body recovery. And I said, that's 50-degree water. Is there any way for him to get physically out of the water? He goes, no. He'll either be dead from hypercapnia, hypoxia, or hypothermia. He said, but you're doing a body recovery. So I get my stuff together. We drive 100 miles an hour to Tallahassee, get on a plane at 6 a.m., fly to Atlanta. From Atlanta, I'm supposed to do Atlanta to Nashville, and then a friend of mine who's a helicopter instructor in the military, he's going to pick me up at Nashville and take me the hour and 45-minute drive into the mountains where I'll do this rescue dive, or what I thought was a body recovery. And right as they're getting ready to back the plane from the gate, they make the announcement that you got to turn your phone to airplane mode. So I grab my phone and I go to switch it into airplane mode, and the stewardess is right next to me. And the phone rings, and it says Brian Krebs. He was the sheriff in charge. And I said, I need to take this. And she said, sir, turn off your phone. I said, no, you don't understand. I have to take this call. She acts like she's going to take my phone away from me. So I hold it out here, and I hit speakerphone. And you hear, hey, Ed, it's Brian Krebs, Sheriff's Department for Jackson County. He said, they're afraid he's not going to be alive by the time you get here. So they're dispatching a state trooper helicopter to pick you up from the Nashville airport. There'll be 2 armed officers who will escort you from the gate to the baggage claim to the car, lights and sirens to the helipad, and then they'll fly you into the mountains. But that's going to put you, Mike Young, I had called him, he was going to come up and assist me. And usually I do body recoveries by myself. For the last 30 years I have. And they said, but that's going to put you an hour plus ahead of your dive partner. Are you okay to do this by yourself? I said, I do them all by myself. I said, I'll be fine. So by this time, the whole plane's listening. And when I hung up, well, first she goes, maybe you should take that. And I'm like, you think? And then I get off the phone, and the whole plane stood up, and they're clapping. You know, go get him. And then they make the announcement when we land. You know, everybody remains seated. I need to get this body recovery guy off. And this time, they made the announcement, everybody stayed seated. And I got my bag down and my one carry-on, and everybody was clapping, go save him, go save him. And as soon as they opened the door, there was 2 state troopers there, and they threw my stuff in the car, lights and sirens to the helicopter, flew me in, and I went in and got the guy out. And everybody that's gone on YouTube and searched Tennessee Cave Rescue, you can see the footage from my actual mass camera of when I popped up in that air pocket, and there he was. And I'm not sure who was more surprised, him or me, because I had seen this reel in the mud, and I'm like, okay, he's going to be dead right here. And then I popped up in this air pocket, and he's sitting there looking at me. He's like, hey, thanks for coming to get me. I'm like, hey, thanks for being here. So it went really well. That was probably the one that got the most notoriety just because of who he was. And so I did this press conference, and then the cops are sneaking me out the back so I can get out of there. And this lady stops me from Good Morning America, and she's said, when are you flying home? And I said, I just got off the phone with Stacy, and she can't give me a flight till tomorrow morning. Oh, would you be on Good Morning America? And she said, where are you staying? I said, I don't know. She hasn't got that far yet. I don't have a hotel yet. And she looked at her assistant. She goes, get him a room at the Marriott. So she said, we'll take you to your room. We'll pay for it. We'll come pick you up at 5 o'clock in the morning, bring you to the studio. You'll do the Good Morning America, and then we'll take you to the plane. So that was probably the most memorable one.
Edd, what is your ultimate plan for cave adventures? The next 10 years?
I didn't have any plans for the first 20. There was not supposed to be a CA. I was supposed to be retired. I'm probably the worst person in the world at retiring, because I quit my excavation and construction company job to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But I don't know. A couple years ago, I thought about in the next few years I wanted to retire and get away from, just quit. I just didn't want to work anymore. Then I got diagnosed with cancer, and luckily for me, they misdiagnosed it. And when they first found a lump in my throat, I never go to the doctors, ever. And Stacy made me go to the ear, nose, and throat doctor. And when he saw it, he popped back. He had this look on his face, and I'm like, well, that doesn't look good. And he goes, no, this is not good. This is bad. This is really bad. You have cancer, and it's bad. I'm like, okay, way to sugarcoat that. And so he's feeling my glands, and then he orders the nurse to get all this stuff, and they numb me up, and they shove a camera down my nose all the way down to somewhere down here. And after all this is done, I said, well, we've obviously passed the sugarcoating stage, so how long have I got? And I'm expecting him to go, nothing to this. And he goes, we can keep you alive for a couple months. And my heart dropped, and I was like, tears coming down my face. And I was like, excuse me? And he said, this is really bad, Edd. And they thought it was already stage 3 or 4. They couldn't see into my stomach, but they said it was in my glands, esophagus, tonsil, and he said that they could keep me alive for a few months. So the bottom line was I was not going to see 2023. And so he begins to tell me what they're going to do and give me all this drugs. And I said, I don't do drugs. And I said, no, I'm not going out that way. I said, I have my own plan. I'm going diving. And he's like, well, let's hold up for a minute. So they set all these scans and tests, in place. And when the PET scan and the CT scans and everything came back, he said, and this is 3 weeks after he basically said I wasn't going to live very long. And so I had been redoing wills, and I have, I don't know, 12 or 15 pieces of property. So I was getting Stacy's name on everything, bank accounts, blah, 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 and figuring my exit strategy. And he tells me to come into the office. I go in, and he says, this is stage 1. We can cure this. And I said, well, I don't know whether I want to kiss you on the lips or punch you in the friggin' mouth. I said, this has been the worst 3 weeks of my life. But they started radiation. It was the worst thing ever. I found out, I told him I wouldn't take the narcotics that they were trying to get me on. And he told me I had to. I told him I wasn't going to. And the pain got so bad that I did. I took it, and hydrocodone, and it didn't work. So after 5 days in a row of it not working, I quit. Then they put me on oxycodone. Then that didn't work, so I quit that. Then they put me on a fentanyl patch, giving me fentanyl 24 hours a day. That didn't work. So he said, well, do you still have the hydrocodone and oxycodone? I said, yeah, I have all of it. I said, I only took it for a week. He gave me enough for 3 months. He said, well, take that with fentanyl. I said, which one? He said, all of them. I said, are you kidding me? 3 of the most addicting drugs on the planet? But the pain got so bad. I mean, I can take pain. I can take a lot of pain. And this was a whole new level of pain. And so I did for a couple days, and it didn't work. So essentially I did the whole thing with no drugs. And I went 150 something days without food. And I went from 220 pounds to 150 pounds. And I was a stick. And I hid from everybody. None of my customers knew. I didn't tell my sisters or my brother. I didn't even tell my dad. And I was taking care of him with his stage 4 cancer. I would hide in the house. When I had to go to the hospital every day, Stacy would come pull up on the yard. I would get in the truck. She'd take me to therapy, radiation therapy, and she'd drop me off, and I'd go in the house and hide. So nobody knew. And then when I finally got through with it and I appeared, this big around, everybody's like, what happened to you? But it gave me a new outlook on life. And I had been putting on a little weight. I'm 64 years old, and I was having trouble getting it off, even though, as you can see, I work out a lot. I have my own gym. So I work out every single day. And as I started working out again, I'm this stick. My arms are this big around. My neck was so small, my dry suit fit like this. And I was at the oncologist, and I said, I've been bodybuilding for 45 years. I know how to do this. And I said, I've been working out every day and eating protein and doing this and getting as much sleep as I can. I said, that's not coming back. I said, over the years of being a big bodybuilder, I've got injured and I've atrophied down. But it comes back quick. And I said, it's not coming back. I said, then I realized I went 150, almost 180 days without food. I think my body ate all my muscles for food. And he said, yeah, that's exactly what happened. And I said, so I'm not getting back. I'm not hypertrophying what atrophied down. I'm actually starting over. I said, this is going to take a while. He said, no, Ed, it's not coming back. And I said, excuse me? And he said, when you put all that body mass on before, you were 20 and 30 years old. You're 60 plus years old now. He said, your body doesn't work that way anymore. He said, it's not coming back. And I said, challenge accepted. And I went back and saw him about 8 months later, and I had already put 25 pounds of muscle on. And he walked into the room and saw me, and he was like, wow, what have you been doing? And I said, proving you wrong. So somebody said that I think you were put on this earth to help people. All the rescues you've done, all the things that are too hard to explain, why you could do things that nobody else could. I think you were put on this planet to help people. So I thought, if that's the case, then I'm just going to keep doing this. And I got a revigored whole me, and I started teaching my classes again after almost 180 days out of the water. And I enjoyed it like I did, you know, when I first started. So so I plan on just keep doing what I'm doing. I'm having fun at this, and I still just enjoy diving. Every day I have off, if I don't have something I've got to do, I'm either, you know, I hop in my plane and go for a flight, or I'll hop on my chopper or my Harley, go for a nice ride, or I'll go just jump in one of the caves for a fun dive. So I still just really love diving, and I just can't see me doing anything else, and I definitely can't see me retiring. I'm a go kind of person. So sitting on the couch and watching the grass grow just has never been in my future.
And how do we reinvigorate the tech diving sport?
20 years ago at Cave Adventures, I started Cave Adventures in August of 23. I was actually filling tanks by, I think, September or October. And November rolled around, and it was Thanksgiving. And we had divers in from Switzerland and Finland, a couple in from, I think, Colorado or somewhere. And they said, "What's good to eat around here?" And I said, "There is nothing open on holidays." And they said, "Wow, so we're going to have convenience store food?" I said, "Convenience stores aren't even open." And I said, "Stacy made turkey for everybody." And they're like, "Oh, we can't invade your house on your holiday." I said, no, that's her plan, is she has enough food for everybody. So we had, I don't know, 16 people at our table for Thanksgiving dinner. And we did the same thing at Christmas, and we've been doing that every Thanksgiving and every Christmas for 20 years. Now, times have changed. Even in a small little town, there are some places that are open that you can get some food. Most places are closed, but there are a couple. But we still have, I think this year we'll have like 20-some people at the table. I think the least we ever had was 11 or 12. I think you were here, Dan, for Thanksgiving, and there was like 11 or 12. It was the smallest. I think the biggest was like 28. So, but anyway, yeah, the plan is just keep doing it till I can't do it anymore.
Thank you. That was an excellent interview. Very well done.
All right,
brother. Yes. And we'll see you.